The objects featured in this tutorial are also included in Secrets of a Fallen Empire, a mod for Empire or Forces of Corruption. Please check out our Steam Workshop page, linked in the description. What's going on, everyone? Today I'm bringing you guys a tutorial on 3ds Max for Empire at War. This is hopefully one part in a series of many. Today I'm going to be just doing what I was planning on working on, which is doing some shadow mesh stuff for a tank. Let's open up 3ds Max, get to work. I'm working on a land unit called the Hut Heavy Tank. It was a bit of a complex model. I've done a lot of stuff to it already. There's not much left to be done to the model itself. I want to go over a few things before I continue working on this. This is what I'm working with. If I open up the material editor, I will see that I've got base material for the object itself, which I will go into in a second. But the collision mesh is this bright blue box. The collision mesh is a big rectangle, nothing too fancy. Crusher, which is a big part on the bottom. This will help Empire at War determine where it crushes a unit, like if it were to run them over. So let's get rid of that. Collision mesh is a little bit more intricate, but still pretty basic. Some basic rectangles. We've got one for the two front tracks, and then a big one in the back that covers everything. And we have our own separate collision for the top turret, which rotates. So since that rotates, that will be attached to the bone that rotates, so that way the collision mesh rotates with the mesh itself, and there's no problems there. So in order to get a working collision mesh, you have to use the mesh collision.fx shader. If you don't have the shaders, you can find them by installing the map editor. This stuff should be hidden in Alamo utility when you export, so as long as it's enabled collision and it's hidden, then it will work properly in game. So we're going to hide it since we don't want to look at it right now. Now this is my tank, and here's the muzzle flash. In order to get the muzzle flash to work correctly, it needs to be named Muzzle A00 Flash. That way, when you shoot from Muzzle A00, it knows that this is the flash that's supposed to go with it. To get the tread working, you have to do a couple of things. One, you have to put bones on where the tread is. So here's a bone right here. This is the right side, so this is tread R. This defines in the game where the footprint tread, like when a tank is rolling on ground, it actually leaves behind a decal or a footprint, if you will call it that. And this bone tells the game where that footprint's coming from. And we had the same for the other side. Now, additionally, you can tell the game which mesh that you want to be animated when it's moving. So to do that, you have to take the actual track itself, the track part of the mesh, and call it tread R, just like the bone. Call it the same exact thing, tread R and tread L. And I've actually done it with all four of them. So this one's also tread L and tread R. And you'll notice that they're all by themselves. Now it's not a full loop, it doesn't have to be. All it needs to be its own separate mesh. And in 3ds Max for Empire at War, you want to make sure that the transform is oriented in such a way to where the Y positive should be facing the back of the model, Y negative should be facing the front of the model. That way when you export, everything is facing the correct way. If you're having problems with the transform, you can go to the hierarchy tab and click Effect Pivot Only, and then you can rotate it to such a way to where the Y is facing backwards. That would typically be 0, 0, 0. Another thing that I've done is I've already done ahead and got the turret part rotated on this model. In order to do that, you have to link objects to their parent. Now, in this case, turret 00 is a bone. It's a tiny bone that's in there. This is turret 00. So, if I pull up the select objects by pressing H, this will show me a list of all the objects in the scene. Turret 00, which is also under the bone named the same, is this big part here. So, barrel and the turret are linked to the bone. Now, if I were to rotate this bone, because everything is linked, everything rotates with it. For FOC naming conventions, if you have a bone that is named turret 00, that part of the mesh will rotate before it shoots. It will rotate into a position to where it will shoot. The rest of the object will stay facing forward. Additionally, I have animated that bone so that the attack frame The attack animation, which is 15 frames, starting at 0 and ending at 14, will look something like this, although it's probably going to look very bad in 3ds Max. So that way it gives the barrel a bit of a recoil. And the muzzle flash is attached. This animation will play regardless of the rotation. So if it's facing this way, the animation still plays correctly. That's something that I will cover in a later episode, is animation. Alright, so that's about as far as I've gotten so far. Collision mesh is done, the crusher is done. The only thing that hasn't been done is the shadow mesh. And shadow mesh is probably the most time consuming part of doing a model, especially if it doesn't have one already. Now I could take the easy way out, and I could just clone this entire mesh and call it a shadow mesh. But that's going to give me problems because on older graphics cards, the whole point of the shadow mesh was to optimize the model so that way it wasn't projecting a shadow off of every single vertice and every single face. That would require a lot of processing power. Back in 2006 when this game came out, that was a big deal. Nowadays it's not so much of a big deal. This model I'm working with has probably 8,000 faces. So the body of the tank itself, not including this part, not including the steering at the front or the turret, has got 4,251 faces. So projecting a shadow off of that isn't a big deal, but when you get a bunch of these in the scene, a bunch of these in the game, it starts to add up. And after a while, it can really tax the graphics card, especially if you don't have a high-end card. Now, I have a high-end card, but that doesn't mean I want to just make models with high-end. Like, this is unnecessarily high-end, is what my point is. I want to make this so that it will be a fluid experience on anyone's computer, because I recognize that there are a lot of people playing Empire at War, especially on Steam. I see a lot of posts daily on Steam about people who are running older spec computers, and that's fine. I understand that, and I want to give them, the people who are playing our mod, I mean, we've got 11,000 subscribers now, so I can only imagine how many of those people are running high end. Probably not very many, especially on a game like this, which doesn't even need high end. My point remains is we have to optimize everything to be as fluid and as smooth as possible to give a good game experience. Because if you get a bunch of objects in the scene that have got 100,000 faces, then you're just going to have problems. Let me give you an example. The Subjugator, and we didn't make this. Credit to Republic at War, Anakin. These guys are amazing. If I were to click on details, the whole of this mesh has 23,000 faces. Here we go. The shadow mesh has 85,500 faces. The shadow mesh is way too complex. It's nice, don't get me wrong. Shadow mesh is nice for sure. Check this out. But it's just way too... I mean, if you take a look at this, do we need 80,000 plus faces for this? I don't think we need that many faces for this. We definitely need, like, this. We need a couple of these cutouts for sure to make it look nice. I guess if the sun were angled in a way to where... So this is what I'm talking about. It needs to be optimized to work, because this could be optimized. You could realistically probably shave 80% of the faces off of that and still have it look the exact same. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm going for. This mesh does not have a shadow volume. I'm form-fitting it to look in such a way where it's presentable, it looks nice. There's a nice shadow, but it doesn't have too many faces. So this one here is I've already spent about an hour on this one. Like I said, it's really time consuming, really a real pain in the ass if you start getting problems like this right here. So let's take a look at this. I've got a problem here. This face shouldn't be here, but I can't just simply remove it. If I remove it, see this right here? This goes from this vertice to this vertice to this vertice. So I can remove this. I'm going to take a look at what deleting this is going to do. So I delete this. Now I've got two faces missing. I can redraw these faces. I think that's what I'm going to do. Let's create a polygon. Bam. Alright, so we've got that problem solved. Now, here's what I'm looking at. Let's make this see-through. So this is what I've used to kind of make it look nice. You can see here, this gives a pretty accurate representation of what the shadow mesh is going to look like. So it's a little bit boxy, but once it projects on the ground, I think it's going to look pretty nice. I've got it fit pretty well, In order to create this, by the way, is I create a box, just a simple box, and then I divide it into segments. The length, I divided it into 4 segments. For width, I definitely divided it into 3 segments, 1, 2, 3. And then there was a bunch of vertices in the middle. There was a vertice for every cross segment in the middle. There's probably 6 or 9 of them, right? What I did was I took them all, put them in the same spot, and then I welded them together. So that way all of those vertices become one vertice that I can just move around. I've tried to keep everything as snug to the mesh as possible. That way I know that I'm going to get a nice looking shadow. I haven't done this part yet. I feel like this one's going to be really easy. Let's see, all I really need to do is create a cylinder. Alright, I'll play it your way. There we go. Alright, so that's not perfect. What we're going to do is we're going to move this cylinder to kind of look close to it. We're going to go over to its modifiers. We see the cylinder modifiers here. Radius is a little too big, so let's knock this down to 4. Still a little too big, but I think we might be able to work with this. I need a top view. There we go. Let's get that up there. It actually has about the same number. Yeah, radius is still too big. Let's cut you down to 3.5. See how that is. Thought I had the same number of edges, but it doesn't. Not quite. Okay, so that looks decent enough. Height. Let's cut you down to 1.3. So what I'm going to do from here, we don't need 5 height segments. We literally don't need any. What we do need, we need to take this and turn it into a poly. And the reason for this is, I'll get to that in a second. Let's take all of these vertices here, move them down. All these vertices here, move them up. Nice and snug. This is interesting because we need these 2 guys here. Let's get these 2 guys here. Now you're gonna go to, we're just gonna drag it up there and make it look nice. Look at that. Now that's not quite what we are looking at here. So let's take these 2 guys and move them down here. There we go. That's what I was going for. So it's not perfect, but remember, we're not going for perfection. We're going for what looks right. And I think once we open this up in Allo Viewer, it's going to look pretty good. I didn't do shadow mesh for this top part here where the light is, and I didn't do shadow mesh for this handlebar. Completely unnecessary. These will never be rendered in a shadow just because of the way they are. They're on top of an object, and nothing's ever going to project this onto another object, except for maybe itself. That's just not necessary. I don't think it's going to really... You're talking about minor details here that I don't want to get into. So, if you really wanted to do that, you could. I'm not going to waste time on it. And we are going to attach cylinder 01. So now this is all one mesh. One more thing we have to do. This isn't required, but I do this because it makes me feel nice and fuzzy inside. Let's put the turn to poly modifier on it. We need to check limit polygon size, and we need to cut that to 3. This triangulates the mesh. And when it gets triangulated, it gets interpreted by DirectX that allows it to display properly in the game. All meshes, all objects period in DirectX have to be triangulated. Now the reason I said we don't have to do this is because when you export it to the Allo format, the exporter plugin actually does this for you, but it doesn't do it on screen, it does it in the background, and it doesn't change the model for you when it exports it. It only does it in the exported file, if that makes sense. I like to triangulate it once I'm finished using it because that way it looks the correct way and I know how it's going to look. So last thing we have to do is this needs to become a mesh, so we just convert to mesh, and then now this is just a mesh. So now let's go to our material editor. We need to create a new material. To get a shader, we have to click on this button here on a new material, and we need to select DirectX shader. Let's get rid of the old material, and we need to pick the correct shader. So by doing that, we click here, go to your folder with the shaders, and we need to pick Mesh Shadow Volume. And then we want to pick our objects that are going to have this, and we're going to assign material to selection. Now we have nice shadow meshes. That tells the engine that these are shadow meshes and that they should be treated as such. So let's go back over something real quick. We don't want collision, and we don't want this to be hidden. If it's hidden, then the shadow won't display. Because this is defined as a shadow mesh, it needs to be enabled. It's not going to show up like this in AlloViewer, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Let's unhide all, and let's give it a good old export. Select allo format. Now let's see if it's a closed volume or not. Let's cross our fingers and hope that it is. It is. Alright, good. I'll probably find an example of something that's not a closed volume. If you ever get a warning that says the shadow geometry is not a closed volume, then you really have got to go back and fix it, because if you don't, it's going to cause a painful amount of lag, a painful amount of load time, a painful amount of file size, amongst other things. It's going to look terrible. There's going to be lines going across the screen. So let's go check out our file. Alright, so that doesn't look right. Notice how it's kind of like the lines are appearing and disappearing. It looks fine on the ground, and that's what I was going for. That shouldn't be like that. Let's try a different strategy. Alright, let's clone the individual parts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to assign the new material to this clone, and I'm going to optimize it. So let's use the optimize modifier and see what this does. Let's, for research purposes, take a look at this. Now, to be safe, we should cap holes in this one, so that way everything is closed. This will be interesting. So here we go. It's not going to work because it's not a closed volume. So here's what happens when it's not a closed volume. I'll show you for reference. This happens. You see that? So this one's a tricky one because no matter what you do, it's even worse. Look at that's hideous. That is hideous. This is the fun part about doing modeling for Empire War, because if you get lazy and you just clone the mesh, that's all you do, and call it a shadow volume, it sometimes doesn't even work. We gotta find a way to get rid of this. I'm gonna reopen this file with what I was working on before. It was on a better track than that. At least I had a closed volume. If you got a closed volume, then you're already most of the way there. I'm gonna take all the vertices on the top. Let's move them down a tiny bit. Let's choose them manually. Just click, 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 right on through. Alright, that's what that's what I wanted. I just want to see what happens. I just want to see what happens. Just want to see what happens. Do we still have the same problem as before? Wow, look at that. We don't have so that fixes it. You've got to have the shadow mesh on the inside of the volume itself. Look at that. I knew I had a feeling. So we got to do that for all the sides now, because now we got the problems on the sides too. That's fine. I think it's because the shadow mesh is a shadow caster, but it's not a shadow receiver. The shadow receiver is the mesh itself, so that's because of lighting, the way lighting works in games. So if you've got the shadow mesh on, if it's bigger than the mesh itself, then it's going to be casting a shadow onto the mesh, even if there's 0.1 of space in between it. So let's go back through here, and we've got to pick apart this and get every vertice on the inside. I'm going to do it by hand. I don't even care. There we go. Perfect. Let's see, the next one's over here. think that's supposed to go right there. Yep, that's right where it's supposed to go. So what I'm doing now is I'm just taking these vertices and I'm putting them inside the vertice right here is the vertice of the mesh. These are the vertices of this shadow volume. I'm gonna get them inside so that way that they're displaying correctly in Allo Viewer. This is for the most part pretty straightforward, I think. That just about covers that. I need to get the sides. So the best way to do that is to take every vertex on the side and just move it in a little bit. And let's take every vertex on this side and let's just move it in a little bit. Let's take a look. Let's see what's going on now. That's that's perfect. That's perfection. I think in my book, that's perfect. I can't even see where this is as good as it gets. I think. Let's play around with the sun just to make sure. Yep. I mean that's realistic. And look, even the cutout is looking pretty nice. Honestly, I would say. Let's check the other side. Bring wheel on around. I don't know if it can get a whole lot better than this. Maybe it can. I'm not a professional 3D studio designer or anything like that, but that's about as good as it gets. And if I were to clone this and it actually worked, it might be a little bit rounder here. We're talking about a game from 2006, guys. And like for me, for what you're going to see, you're going to be in like when you're playing the game, this is like real size right here. Probably maybe like this, right? That looks round. That you can't tell me that doesn't look round. I'm on a high resolution screen. I'm at 1440p. That's high res. That's good enough. That's good enough. If you zoom all the way into your unit, you're looking at it like this, it still looks good. It still looks good. So you're only going to see it if you open it up in a model viewer and you look in and see look at those jagged edges, look at those N64 pointy edges. So that's my lesson for today, and I hope you got something from this. I'm gonna continue to work on this model, and I'll show you guys a finished product, hopefully in the near future. So I hope this helped you guys out, and as always, have a good day.